Hey everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back to another edition of Sports on the Positive Tip. This is where we have conversations at the intersection of sports and faith. And this is a special interview edition today. Kenny Squared is out on assignment. I think he's covering the Deshaun Watson injury there in Cleveland. And so Dr. Eddie O'Connor, he is a licensed clinical psychologist with a specialization in sports psychology. He is also an author. And Dr. Eddie came on and talked about so many wonderful things that not only help athletes, but help you become the high performer that you were meant to become. So listen in as he talks about his take on positive thinking, what the most important mental skill is, how do you focus even a little bit better, perfectionism, good or bad, what does he say about anxiety, and you really don't want to miss what he says about sleep. You don't want to miss a second of this important conversation. Let's get at it.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Sports on the Positive Tip. We have conversations at the intersection of sports and faith. We've got a special interview today. Kenny Squared is out on assignment. And so I have the honor of speaking to licensed clinical psychologist with a specialization in sports psychology. Dr. Eddie O'Connor has joined me today. Dr. Eddie, it is so great to have you on. How you doing there, sir?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me on here. I can't wait to help your listeners.
Oh, yes, and you're going to be a big help. I should also say Dr. Eddie is also an author. We'll find out a little bit more about that towards the end as we're going to push you to get his book and connect with him. But Dr. Eddie, I want to first hear your backstory and what gave you the inspiration to do what you do.
Well, it was so interesting. So ever since I was a little kid, I knew I wanted to help people. You kind of hear that from a lot of psychologists. Mm-hmm. And I was reading Freud, like in high school for fun, analysis of dreams. And I was a runner. And what happened to me was I was so wrapped up in my athletic identity as a cross-country runner in 800 meters that I didn't realize it at the time, but fear of failure, pretty common. That was paralyzing me. I wish I could say I was running faster, but I was stuck at 2:11 in the 800 meters. And my senior year, I just kept hitting that and coming across the finish line, throwing up as if I was exhausted, but not being tired. And this happened week after week after week. It wasn't until much later on that I had figured out what was going on was that because my athletic identity was overly strong and I was putting too much value and worth into my results, that the idea of not breaking 210, which was like this mental block in my head, this magical number to get into the single digits, that I didn't know what would happen. Like I was, for some emotional reason that it was just going to be terrible if I did this. So what my mind was doing was actually inhibiting me throughout my entire race. And then when I came across the finish line, I always had an excuse. I was like, oh, darn, man, I did it again. But I kept hope alive in the sense that if I just ran faster, I could be the runner that I thought I could be. I'm only off by 1 second. And I kept hope alive. And this happened week after week after week. And I had no idea. And I'm throwing up after the races as if my mind was trying to convince me that I was actually giving 100%. But I knew I wasn't. I was training so much. There's no reason. I was running 2:11 junior year. And a whole year of training. I was great at practice. Didn't make any sense. And it wasn't until later on that I had figured out how powerful the mind can be and how our emotional agendas can dictate and sabotage our behaviors. Because my investment, instead of it like it is today in other things, my character is made up of other things other than having to earn my achievement. I work with a lot of high achievers, perfectionists that really get caught up in I am the sum of my accomplishments. And I was full bore into that early on in high school. And then college and graduate school afterwards. Took a bit for me to get the hang of this. But when I did that, what was happening was that by having a reason that I could fail, like explaining it away, then it meant I never really did fail. Now you and I know, well, it still does. Like when you run a 211, you run a 211. Nobody argues with it. But the thing that I didn't get to realize, and if people are resonating with my story, I would offer this right away. I wish I was able to slow down and realize that when I still ran 211, one, that was still failing. Like even if I had an excuse, the excuse doesn't mean anything.
Right.
But my coach still supported me. My teammates still put their arms around me, and we went out and we had fun and had great relationships. My girlfriend still loved me. My parents were still completely supportive. Like nothing changed, even though I was failing. And if I had able to realize that a little bit earlier on and not be so much in my head and so much wrapped into what I had to do, then I think I would have, who knows, could I have run 205? Could I have run 159? Now, short story, it ended well because I ran a 209. I don't know if my coach was a little fast on the thumb finger or not, but that's what inspired me to get started on this. And I'll shrink the rest of my history, but then I went to graduate school for clinical psych. I wanted to study everything that athletes suffered from the most. So I specialized in pain and injury rehabilitation. I do a ton with performance anxiety now with a passion. And my whole life now is just dedicated to really helping athletes and other high performers overcome their obstacles to excellence so they can have that sense of peace and consistent excellence.
Wow, what an amazing, amazing journey and an amazing story. And I think it was you. I don't think it was the fat thumb on the
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I think it was you. And I want to mention that because you also work with musicians and performers and other high performers. You don't just work with athletes. So let's go down that road now. So what is it that you do? How do you help performers get past that obstacle that you have? What are some things that are holding us back and blocking us?
Well, I'll give you my favorite because there's a lot of things that go on and a lot of reasons, but one of the most common and easily fixable I find is this idea of like the anxiety that we have. We have 4 basic human emotions: happy, sad, mad, and scared. And Kenny, let me ask you, how many of those are positive?
Oh, just happy. One, right? Yeah.
So let's start there. We live in a world that is intolerant of unpleasant emotions. I mean, anytime I'm scared, people say, "Oh, don't, calm down, don't worry." Anytime I'm angry, they say, "Hey, relax, you're too intense." Anytime I'm sad, somebody tries to cheer me up. This even happened at my parents' funeral. Somebody saying, "Hey, they've gone on to a better place." Like such an intolerance of discomfort that we have. But as athletes, musicians, performing artists under pressure, high pressure, police, firemen, military, we all know that life's not easy, that the suffering, or at least the adversity that we go through, is not only a part of life, but a necessary part to actually build resilience. And we have to really get past this idea of pathologizing every time our young athletes are scared and nervous. So the number one thing that I do, and I can elaborate a lot, but the number one thing I want people to hear is that you should be anxious. You're not, and again, I'm not saying you should have panic attacks and obsessive compulsive behaviors. I want to respect that. But most of the athletes that come in with performance anxiety, they don't want to make mistakes. They're afraid of what the coach is going to say. They're nervous about, losing. They hate losing. They don't want to be embarrassed. Yes. What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to tell you mistakes are okay? As a recovering perfectionist myself, you're never going to hear that from me. Mistakes are not okay. We don't want to think positive about it. But when an athlete or high performer struggles to, first of all, have to relax in these high pressure situations, which is unrealistic, or, can't tolerate mistakes, which is unfortunate because they're going to come, I want to normalize it for you. And more than that, teach you how to lean into and embrace the discomfort, see the value in it, understand why it's so unpleasant, but relate to it in a different way. And that's where I think I'm different than most sports psychology professionals, about the positive thinking and needing to get motivated and being confident. You don't control all of those things. What I want to help you do is learn about all of this adversity, understand why you feel that way, because it's a really good reason, and take the lesson from it. And that's what I do in my Success Stories community and other things that I offer. It's really about relating differently to this adversity that so many people pathologize. It's good for you.
Yeah, I love that, because we spend a lot of time, Doctor, not validating people's emotions, right? The anger, yes, the sadness. The first thing I say when I speak at funerals is that it's okay to mourn. That's okay. please do. You know, that's going to be good actually for you. And I love that you said that. So we're using energy in kind of a different way, and channeling it differently. I love it.
That's it exactly. When you put it that way, if I hate to interrupt, but that's all of it. But like all of my performers are struggling because they're fighting something. They've got this resistance. They want to change something. I was doing this great meditation retreat, 10-day silent meditation retreat. And one of the best lessons that they had heard, they said, misery is a result of only two things. You either want something you don't have, or you have something you don't want. I was like, that hits everything. It's some fighting with reality. So when you take this acceptance, and it's not resignation, but when you're opening up to what actually is, you drop the struggle. And it's the struggle, as you had mentioned, is what's holding our performance back. And we lean into what actually is, and then we have the strength to deal with what is actually happening. You know what? Anytime I tried to fight reality, reality always won.
Oh, there's no doubt. No doubt. I want to ask you about positive thinking because you have a very different perspective on it. Hey, what's wrong with positive thinking?
I admit I may be a little bit too enthusiastic about that message of like really preaching about how I don't believe in it and I don't like it. So I thank you for actually asking that question that way. I need to start toning it down a little bit. But I do it only because A, I want to get people's attention, and B, I just want to run counter to what everybody thinks is that they have to be positive or that that's the magical way. So to clarify, positive thinking is great when it works. And that's the part that I'd really like to hold on to, when it works. And when you can think positively and be confident, it works tremendously well. So I don't disagree with any of the positive psychology out there or what, again, my colleagues are doing in the positive focusing and the positive self-talk. When you can hold on to that, it can really change your experience.
Okay.
But where I specialize in is in the athletes that it's not working. Because I know I told myself a lot of things for a lot of decades that sometimes I still can't hold on to. Look, I'm still doubting if I ran 209. You're still having to encourage me. That was a long time ago. Like the negative thinking that shows up isn't always adapted or changed when we talk positively. So I prefer to look at our self-talk, whether it be positive or negative, and get away from that that evaluation and say, is it working or isn't it? For example, I was in the gym a couple of weeks ago, and I started being very, very negative, cursing myself out, calling myself names. And somebody actually came up to me and was like, hey, like, knowing I'm a sports psychologist, hey, is that what you do? Like, would you want your kids talking to somebody that way? And I said, first of all, I'm saying all of these curses with loving kindness. Second of all, you know what? This negative self-talk is working because it's getting me jacked up. I'm realizing that I have to do better. And then I hit a PR and I like was able to lift. And I wasn't able to do it with all the positive thinking and giving myself it was working. So the big strategy I would offer here to double down on is don't worry if it's positive or negative. Look at the impact that your talk is having on you. And if it's working, keep it up, whether it's positive or negative. And if it isn't, then change it. I mean, we've seen many times when people think positively and then they don't come out with enough intensity or they don't really prepare because there's no urgency. So let's really just move away from the positive or negative discussion and look at more of the function of our language and what's working and what isn't.
Yeah, there has to be action behind it, right? I mean, it's one thing to just, I'm real positive, but if you don't have the action behind it, and I love that, again, you're validating that it's okay. I love that story of in the gym there, but you're validating it's okay to be a little angry and a little frustrated. That's okay. Dr. Eddie, in your opinion, what's the most important mental skill that we need to have to really, get to where we need to be?
Oh, that's great. But you like asking me these questions where I've had conflicts with people. So in the circle of colleagues, we've had these discussions, and I'd say that some people say motivation, but I like to counter and say, I don't know. I do a lot of things when I'm not motivated. I think commitment trumps that. And then others will say, again, confidence. And I really get that because when you're confident, so many things are empowered. But I've also seen athletes and worked with athletes and high performers, and I've helped them win when they weren't confident. But the answer to the question, I believe, is focus. And by focus, I mean putting your attention to the right thing at the right time on purpose. Because I've never seen anybody be distracted and do well. I've never So I think there's a real strong correlation. And we know science and experience tells us that when we're dialed into the present moment, focusing on what we're doing as we're doing it, across disciplines, sport, family, this conversation, people listening to this podcast, when you're paying attention to what you're doing, when your head is where your feet are at, you always get your best performance. You're harnessing everything about your mind and your energy into the same place. And so you can maximize your potential when you're focused.
Wow. I love that. So I want to ask a life example here, sports example. Field goal kicker on an NFL team, 1 second left. If they make the field goal, the team wins. If they don't, their team loses. Everything's on the line. There's 80,000 people screaming at them. And then the other coach calls timeout to ice them. And now they have to come back out. What are some tips to keep that focus? Because certainly they have to 1, 2, 3, however many steps they take, and to kick it, and everything has to work exactly right. What are some tips to keep that focus when there's so many distractions? And I'm using that as an example, but just in our lives, right? When our phones go off, or how do you keep that focus?
Again, beautiful question. And I'm going to give you an answer that I think that people don't typically recognize, because at the moment of the field goal kicker or in our lives, it feels like what's so important is what our head is saying and the pressure. Like, I don't want to lose the game. Are my teammates going to be upset? Am I going to be in financial ruin? How are my kids? I am not saying that those things don't matter. I'm actually saying the opposite. I'm saying those things do matter. That kicker better not miss that kick. It's going to cost them the playoffs. It's going to cost them millions of dollars. It might cost them his entire job. To invalidate that and tell them to just be positive, remember the kick that he did make, is a problem, because by remembering the kick that you did make and thinking positive, it's going to highlight the idea that the opposite could happen. So that's number one. Like, disengage that struggle. And you did it well when you had said, Kenny, that they have to kind of take their steps and do 1, 2, 3. That's ultimately what it is. When you say what's important now, that's my favorite focusing strategy. WIN. If you want to win, it stands for what's important now. And if it's to make the kick, as you said earlier, you need to focus on the action steps that it takes to make the kick. And this doesn't matter if it's in your backyard, if it's in a preseason game, regular season game, or whether it's a NFL record in the Super Bowl.
Wow.
Those outside situations are not what's important. They're important emotionally. I'm not invalidating the pressure, but understanding about how much you care. If you really want the end result, it's about focusing on what you're doing as you're doing it. And this is simple to understand, but takes a tremendous amount of practice and doing it in greater and greater stressful situations, so that you can become somebody like Justin Tucker, who can hit these things. But he will tell you exactly the same thing, I promise you, that he approaches every kick the same way. His strength comes in, it's just he's gotten really good about focusing on what he needs to do. And by that focus skill, you're automatically letting go of everything else.
Wow. That and that's could be such a difference between, you mentioned Justin Tucker, Adam Vinatieri is one who comes to mind for me, that seems like he never missed, and I don't know how many games that he won that were huge games, right? And in the Super Bowl and everything. That is so awesome to just that tip to keep that focus is great. I want to ask you about perfectionism. You mentioned it a little bit earlier. Good or bad? I think all of us know people in our lives that are perfectionists. I've never tried to be. I've never aspired to do that. But is that a good or bad thing when it comes to what you're trying to achieve with people?
Well, the best psychological answer is always, it depends. And it depends on the context, and it depends on what flavor you're talking about. So I need to copyright this, but I like to teach my perfectionists to be perfect perfectionists. Because what I found early in my career is if I tried to tell them that, mistakes were okay, as I mentioned earlier, or how to relax and how to, strive for excellence instead, it didn't resonate. And I understood that why too, because anybody would tell me, like, how many times have you seen perfectionists? They often come into my office and they'll say, like, nobody's harder on me than I am. If you are priding yourself on that, I want to just take pause and kind of say, okay, is that a good thing? Well, here's how it is. I know that by kicking my own butt all the time and demanding perfection, I achieved a lot. And most perfectionists that I know have, at least to a point, achieved a lot. And to drop that perfectionism is frightening because we don't want to lose our motivation. So the one quick tweak, because I won't take all day for you, but the fastest way to become the perfect perfectionist is to change your relationship with mistakes. I am not suggesting that you like them, that you say that they're okay, or even think that they're okay. They are not. At the very same time, respect that the only way to learn how to get better at something is by making a mistake and finding out what didn't work. The problem is if you're going to make the same mistake over and over and not correct it because of your ego, in the same way that I couldn't push myself when I was a young runner and I couldn't push through and actually give my best out of an emotional fear. If you're intolerant of mistakes, you'll never be perfect. You'll most likely not even be excellent or very good. Respect that this unpleasant, difficult, ugly experience of making mistakes is a necessary part of your growth. And if you can actually learn from every mistake that you make, which takes humility, takes patience, it takes time, but if you can focus in that and correct the mistake, do it differently the next time. If you make another mistake, do it differently. Please know that each and every time you do that, you move one step closer to that perfection.
Yeah.
And all the while, we know that, oh, well, nobody's perfect, and we just kind of throw that away. I'm like, no, but people are excellent. That's the path to excellence, and that you can have, and you can have that today if you're willing to feel the pain of mistakes and learn from them.
Yeah, I love that. And you so beautifully expanded on just that expression that we throw around all the time, right? Oh, mistakes are a part of life. And okay, yes, but I love the way you expanded on that. And it gives us that better realization. I wrote down fire alarm here next to the word anxiety because I heard you talk about those two a couple of times. Expand a little bit on that for us.
Yeah, so that's one of my favorite ways to help athletes and other high performers relate differently to the anxiety. I'd mentioned earlier about how it's a normal expression, a normal feeling that we would have. And how do we become comfortable with it is relating to it as if it's a fire alarm. So again, quickly, if a fire alarm went off right now, you and I said, hey, you know what? Most fire alarms don't mean anything. I've heard hundreds of fire alarms, been through drills. It's never anything. Let's just ignore it. Would you feel comfortable?
No.
Yeah, I like it. No, heck no. Why? Well, because every time we've seen a fire, we also know that a fire alarm is going off. So even though almost every time I've heard a fire alarm, every time in my own life, it's never meant anything, we would never, ever say to ignore it. What do we do when there's a fire alarm? Well, it says it could be something. So we calmly look into it. It's like, oh, I'm burning bacon on the stove, so I'll need to take it off. Or, oh, it's just a fire drill. And if it was just a fire drill, for example, let's say we were in an office building, you and I would have to focus a little bit more, and the alarm would be annoying and still be going. But since the supervisor said we could still finish this podcast, we just have to lean in and talk louder and really focus. Not ideal, but this is what we're going to do, and we could do it. And that's how I invite you to relate to your anxiety. It's a fire alarm. Don't believe it, whatever it says right away. I've gone through decades of this junk that I tell myself, or these fears that I have about the future that held me back because I felt like they were some type of prediction or truth. But every anxiety I ever had just pointed me towards something that I really cared about. Like if you're nervous about the test tomorrow, it's because you want to pass. So what do? Lean into the alarm. Well, instead of just trying to make yourself feel better, I don't care about what you feel like. Are you ready for the test or aren't you? Half the time you'll find that, no, not really. Then study more. Your anxiety is a good thing. It's a great fire alarm to tell you to study. Same thing if you're worried about winning and losing. I'll tell you, every athlete at every level I've ever worked could work harder, could do more to prepare.
Yeah.
So when you're nervous or anxious about something, that conversation, if somebody's going to say yes or no on a date, that you ask them out on, it's all because you care about these outcomes. We don't worry about stuff we don't care about. So if you have anxiety, number one, please know that it's pointing you towards something you care about, and then it's telling you, hey, be careful. Don't believe what your anxiety says, but check it out and respond to it like a fire alarm. If it's a blazing fire, get the heck out of the house, like by all means. But most of the time it isn't, and there's something else that you could do to prepare yourself. Then take that action. And the best thing is that you'll get the best results. You study, you'll get a better grade on the test. You prepare, you'll do better on the field. And then your anxiety will also go down.
Yeah.
But that's just gravy. I'm like, don't do it to feel better. Do it to be better.
That's just a phenomenal analogy. I love it. That's going to stick with me forever. I love that. I want to ask you just one or two more questions. This has been amazing. Sleep. I was a little bit surprised at your take on sleep. What is your take on sleep?
Oh man, you want me to be brief, right?
Oh, you don't have to be brief. It's
number one performance enhancer.
Yeah.
Period. And we all know this, but this is another thing that sleep's almost become cliche because we all know we should get our 8 hours. Yet when you look at studies, nobody is. No, like not nobody, but almost nobody. We've got a sleep deprivation problem in the US. And our culture reinforces it. Like if we go to the workplace, I work with, business coaches and, like what are not business coaches, but business people. I coach with them too. And the cultures there are like, hey, you grinding, you're the first one into the office and the last one to leave. You're celebrated. You might even be getting rewards for your lack of sleep. But this is personal to me. My dad was an immigrant from Ireland, 4th grade education. So to provide for me and my siblings, he worked 80 hours a week for over 40 years. And honestly, it killed him. Like that's why he died at a relatively young age of 69. Research has shown over and over again, the whole reason we have to sleep 1/3 of our life away is because every process, every organ in our body is affected by sleep. When we go to bed, our learning happens, our recovery, our muscles build, our creativity gets expanded, our brains rest, and emotional control becomes more likely the next day. I could go on and on and on. Performance enhancement studies of what going from 8 to 9 hours does for performance enhancement. You might say, well, I get enough sleep. Yeah, but I've worked with pro teams and I'm stuff like, but you could be better. This is why, some athletes are like, I just read that Joe Burrow goes to bed at 8 o'clock at night, except when he's playing on Monday Night Football. But, why is he going to bed during the season, 8 o'clock at night? Well, because he and other athletes know it's sleep where their body restores and recovers, and they have to be their very best. So whether it's for emotional reasons or physical reasons, I'm going to guess if you're not getting at least 8, and people are different, but if you're getting less than 6, when I have athletes come in and they're telling me they're getting 6, like a college student sometimes, I refuse to do any mental training with them until I'm getting them up at least 1 to 2 more hours more. And when I've done that, I remember one football player I worked with, within 2 weeks of him jumping from 5.5 to 8 hours sleep, his mood was better, his anxiety was down, his motivation had increased. And I didn't do anything other than help him go to bed. Half his problems went away just with sleep. And then a couple of weeks later, as he was able to use the skills that we were teaching, like the fire alarm and other things, then you have the ability to use it. On 5 hours sleep, 6 hours sleep, you could have that great metaphor. You aren't going to be able to do a darn thing with it. So by all means, please, I challenge everybody listening to this podcast, whatever sleep you're getting, give me a week or two of getting, if not an hour, at least 30 minutes more a night. And then write in on the comments, to your podcast, Kenny, and tell us. And I'm sure the answer is going to be how you're doing better. Test it. Don't believe me. Test it. Give yourself 30 days of an hour more sleep a night. You're going to have a tremendous change.
Yeah, I am so glad you said that, and as strongly as you did. I'm a cancer survivor several years now, but I'll never forget my oncologist said the best thing that you can do, especially after you have chemotherapy, is sleep, and sleep for 8-9 hours. This is how you're going to be able to beat this. Your body's going to recover. It's just so much behind that. I'm so glad you said that in such the strongest way. One last question: motivation or inspiration? Which one is the little nugget there?
Why pick?
You need both. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, and I wouldn't even say need, because more so I'm back down to the committed action.
Yes.
So I hunker down in the place where, motivation and inspiration is gravy. What's needed is committed action. And I've never seen anybody stay inspired or stay motivated. I've seen tons of coaches give great speeches at the beginning, but 2-3 plays in and you're getting punched in the face. Motivation and inspiration changes.
Yeah.
So these are wonderful emotional states, but I'll never, ever, ever prioritize how you're feeling over what you're doing. And both inspiration and motivation are emotional. and they're helpful. And when you can work with them, absolutely. But I don't want anybody leaving this podcast and thinking that that's necessary or a requirement in order to do what they need to do. If we've only got a half hour on this podcast, I want to double down on committed action. I would actually add, what do you value? If you want to concentrate on something emotional, what's important to you? Because that will be the thing, in the fourth quarter, when you're losing, when you're injured, when you have no motivation, when you can remember why you're doing it, that will be the emotional thing that you can hook onto to bring you through. So I would say values and committed action over motivation and inspiration.
Awesome. I love it. Love it. This has been amazing, sir. Dr. Eddie, you are fantastic, and please continue to do the work you're doing. And this went way beyond sports. I really feel it did. How can people connect with you and get your book? Tell us a little bit about your book and how can folks get it and connect with you?
Yeah, well, the book is called The Psychology of Performance: How to Be Your Best in Life, and it's through the great courses. And it's a great overview of all of the mental skills that you can use. Since then, what I've done and what I'd really like to highlight is my Success Stories community. It's a recent project that I've done. It's going to be my life's work moving forward, heavily invested in it. And what that is, it's an online platform. It's at dreddieoconnor.com/membership. And everything that we've talked about today is on the inside there. And rather than just overwhelm you with more information, I'm able to walk alongside you in this community way of putting it into action, which is why it's a membership model. So that month by month, we've got monthly mindsets, we've got team meetings, we've got modules that you can do. But more importantly, is this messaging and this idea about how do I implement it? How do I actually make these changes? And I've got, teenage athletes and older adults, master's level athletes. I've got professional musicians. I've got people just improving their health. So I designed it in a way that while it's got a sports metaphor that we work through, it's really open for all levels of performance. And if you're not at your best consistently, this is a community where you can, come in and walk with myself and others as we overcome those obstacles to excellence.
Yeah, love it. Wow. Absolutely. That'll all be in the show notes. Folks, I really, really want to inspire you to go out and look at the community. I did see your website. I'm going to jump a little bit more into it after the podcast here. Dr. Eddie O'Connor, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your energy, for just your caring also about wanting to see people be at their best and be healthy and all the things you stand for. Thank you so much for all your time today.
Truly my pleasure, and best wishes to I'm here for you.
Absolutely. Well, folks, we're going to leave it right there. This has been Sports on the Positive Tip. Nothing gets more positive than today's show. This has been with Kenny and Dr. Eddie O'Connor. Thank you so much. We'll talk to everybody real soon.